The dust kicked up around Ryland Foster's boots as he stood in the middle of his ranch house, staring down at the pile of torn shirts and trousers that had been accumulating for the better part of 3 months. It was late spring in 1877, and the Colorado Territory around Montrose had finally started to warm after a brutal winter that had claimed half his cattle and all of his hope. He picked up a shirt with a ripped sleeve, remembering how the barbed wire had caught it when he was mending the fence after Sarah died. That was 8 months ago now, though some days it felt like yesterday, and other days it felt like a lifetime. His hands, calloused and rough from years of ranch work, held the fabric awkwardly. Sarah had always handled the mending, the cooking, the softness that made this rough life bearable. Now, at 32 years old, he found himself alone in a house that echoed with memories, and surrounded by clothes he did not know how to fix. He had tried once, sitting by lamplight with a needle and thread, but his fingers were too thick, too clumsy, and he had given up after an hour of frustration. The knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Visitors were rare out here, 5 miles from town on land that stretched toward the Uncompahgre Plateau. He dropped the shirt back onto the pile and walked to the door, his spurs jingling softly with each step. When he pulled open the heavy wooden door, he found himself looking at a woman he had never seen before. She stood straight-backed despite the weariness evident in her dark eyes, holding a worn carpet bag in one hand. Her dress was simple, a faded blue calico that had seen better days but was clean and properly mended. Dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her face, though showing the signs of hardship, held a quiet determination. "Mr. Foster?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty he could see in the way she gripped her bag. "That would be me," Ryland replied, curiosity overcoming his usual wariness. "My name is Zelda Jordan. I was told in town that you might be in need of someone who can sew and mend. I am looking for work, any work, and Martha at the general store said you have been asking around." Ryland studied her for a moment. She was younger than him, maybe 25 or 26, with an earnestness that reminded him of how Sarah used to look when she was determined about something. "Martha talks too much," he said, but there was no anger in his voice. "Though I suppose in this case she was not wrong. You any good with a needle?" "I worked as a seamstress in St. Louis before I came west," Zelda said. "I can mend anything that is not beyond saving, and I can make new if needed." "What brings you all the way out to Montrose?" The question was direct, perhaps too direct, but Ryland had learned that in this country, knowing who you were dealing with could mean the difference between safety and trouble. Zelda met his eyes without flinching. "My husband died 6 months back. Cholera. We had only been married a year and we had nothing saved. His family blamed me, said I brought bad luck. I had an aunt who lived in Denver, so I used what little I had to come west. But when I got there, I found she had passed 2 years prior. I have been working my way through the territory since, taking whatever honest work I can find." The honesty in her answer caught him off guard. Most people hid their pain, wrapped it up in pleasantries and half-truths. But there was something about standing on the threshold of a stranger's home, asking for help, that seemed to strip away pretense. "I am sorry for your loss," Ryland said, and meant it. "I know what it is like to lose someone. My wife Sarah died last September, complications from childbirth. The baby did not make it either." Zelda's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I am sorry. That is a terrible burden to carry." For a moment they stood there, two people who had known grief, recognizing it in each other like travelers might recognize the marks of a familiar road. Then Ryland stepped back and gestured inside. "Come in. I have got a mountain of clothes that need mending and I can pay fair wages. I cannot offer much, but there is a small room off the kitchen that you could use if you need a place to stay. It was meant to be a pantry, but it has a window and enough space for a bed. Zelda's relief was visible, though she tried to hide it. Thank you, Mr. Foster. I would be grateful for both the work and the room. She stepped inside and Ryland closed the door behind her. The house was neat enough. He had always been tidy by nature, but it lacked the warmth it had once held. The furniture was solid and well made, pieces he and Sarah had saved for or built themselves. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "The pile is over there," he said, pointing to the corner where he had dumped the clothes. "There is more in the bedroom and probably some in the barn too. I kept meaning to gather it all up proper, but time got away from me." Zelda set down her bag and walked over to the pile, kneeling beside it with the ease of someone accustomed to such work. She picked up the shirt he had been holding earlier, examining the tear with a practiced eye. "This is not too bad. The fabric is still good. I can have this mended by evening if you have thread and needles." "Sarah kept all that in a basket by her chair," Ryland said, pointing to a rocking chair near the fireplace. "I have not touched it." Zelda glanced at the chair, then back at him, understanding in her eyes. "Would you prefer I use something else? I do not want to intrude on your memories." "No," Ryland said after a moment. She would have wanted her things to be useful. There is no point in them sitting there gathering dust when they could be put to good use. She nodded and went to the basket, finding it full of thread in various colors, needles carefully stuck into a pincushion, scissors, and other notions. "She was well prepared," Zelda said softly. "She was good at everything she did," Ryland replied, his voice rough. Then, clearing his throat, he continued, "I have got work to do outside. The horses need tending and I need to check the irrigation ditches. There is bread and some cold beef in the kitchen if you get hungry. Help yourself to whatever you need." "Thank you, Mr. Foster, Ryland," he said. "If you are going to be staying here, might as well use my given name." "Then you should call me Zelda," she replied, and for the first time she offered a small smile. He nodded and headed outside, grateful for the excuse to escape the strange intimacy of having someone new in his home. The morning sun was climbing higher, promising a warm day. His dog, a cattle dog named Tucker, bounded up to greet him, tail wagging. At least Tucker was always happy, Ryland thought as he scratched behind the dog's ears. The work waiting for him was endless, as it always was on a ranch. The horses needed to be turned out to pasture. The cattle needed checking. Fences always needed mending. And the irrigation ditches that brought water from the Uncompahgre River to his fields required constant maintenance. He lost himself in the rhythm of it, the familiar patterns that had been his life for the past 8 years since he had claimed this land. It was late afternoon when he finally headed back to the house, sweaty and tired but satisfied with what he had accomplished. As he approached, he could see through the window that Zelda had moved Sarah's rocking chair closer to the light and was sitting in it, needle moving with quick, efficient movements through fabric. When he entered, she looked up and set aside her work. "I hope you do not mind that I moved the chair. The light is better here by the window." "It is fine," Ryland said, removing his hat and hanging it on its peg. He looked at the pile of clothes, which had noticeably shrunk. Several shirts now hung on the backs of chairs, clearly mended and waiting to be put away. "You have been busy." "I finished 12 pieces so far," Zelda said. "Some needed more work than others, but nothing was beyond repair. You take good care of your clothes, even the ones that got torn. Good fabric, well made. They will last years more with proper mending." Ryland picked up one of the shirts, examining the neat, nearly invisible stitches that closed a tear in the shoulder. "You do fine work." "Thank you. My mother taught me when I was young. She said a woman who could sew well would never starve because there was always mending to be done. Zelda's voice held a note of sadness. She was right, I suppose. Your mother, is she still back east? She died when I was 17. Fever. My father went a year later. That is when I went to St. Louis to live with my aunt on my mother's side and learned proper dressmaking. Zelda set down the shirt she had been working on. I made the dress I wore to my wedding. Pink silk with lace at the collar. I sold it in Denver to pay for the stagecoach ticket to Montrose. The matter-of-fact way she said it, as if selling her wedding dress was just another necessary step, struck Ryland as both heartbreaking and admirable. This country asks a lot of people, he said. It does, Zelda agreed. But it also offers second chances, or so I have been told. That evening Ryland cooked supper, a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. It was nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. Zelda had protested that she should cook since she was working for him, but he had insisted that today she should just focus on the mending. They ate at the wooden table, Tucker lying at Ryland's feet, hoping for scraps. The conversation was sparse but not uncomfortable. Zelda asked about the ranch, and Ryland found himself talking more than he had in months, explaining about the cattle, the challenges of irrigation in this dry country, his hopes to expand the herd now that the worst of winter was past. "How much land do you have?" Zelda asked. 320 acres. I claimed 160 as a homestead back in '69, and I bought the rest over the years as I could afford it. It is not the biggest spread, but it is mine, and the land is good. The river gives us water, and the grass grows well if you manage it right. You must have worked very hard to build all this. Sarah and I did, Ryland said. She was a rancher's daughter from Wyoming. She knew the life, knew what she was getting into when she married me. We had 8 good years together before. He trailed off, unable to finish. Zelda reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of comfort that was over almost before it began. 8 good years is more than some people ever get. I suppose that is true, Ryland admitted. What about you and your husband? James was a clerk in a shipping office, Zelda said. We met at church. He was kind and gentle, not like some of the rougher men who came calling. We had 1 year, like I said, and most of that he was healthy. The cholera came fast. He was sick for 5 days, and then he was gone. His mother said if I had been a better wife, I would have saved him somehow, as if love could stop disease. That is a cruel thing to say. Grief makes people cruel sometimes, Zelda said with a shrug. I try not to hold it against them. They lost a son, I lost a husband, we all lost something. After supper, Ryland showed Zelda the small room off the kitchen. It was indeed small, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet, with a single window that looked out toward the barn. There was no furniture in it except for some empty shelves. I will bring in a bed from the barn, Ryland said. I've got an extra one out there and a chest you can use for your things. It is not much, but it is clean and dry. It is more than I had yesterday, Zelda said. Yesterday I was sleeping in the back room of the boarding house, sharing with 3 other women and paying money I could barely spare. This is a blessing, Ryland. He felt something warm in his chest at the sound of his name in her voice, then immediately felt guilty. Sarah had only been gone 8 months. It was too soon to feel anything for anyone else, was it not? He pushed the thought away and went to fetch the bed. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Ryland would rise before dawn, do the morning chores, eat the breakfast that Zelda insisted on making despite his protests, and then head out to work the ranch. Zelda would spend her days mending, and the pile of torn and damaged clothes steadily shrank. But she did not stop there. She began mending other things, curtains that had torn, a tablecloth with a stain she somehow managed to remove. even Tucker's blanket, which had been coming apart at the seams. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk. Slowly, carefully, like two people learning a new dance, they began to know each other. Ryland learned that Zelda loved to read, that she had brought 3 precious books with her from St. Louis: the Bible, a volume of poetry, and a novel by Charles Dickens. Zelda learned that Ryland had grown up in Kansas, the son of a saddle maker, and that he had come west after the war seeking land of his own. "You fought in the war?" Zelda asked one evening. "I did," Ryland said, his voice tight. "Enlisted in '62 when I was 17. Fought with the Kansas Cavalry until '65. I do not talk about it much. Those were hard years, and I saw things I would rather forget." Zelda nodded, not pressing for more. She had her own sorrows, her own things she did not wish to speak about. They could respect that in each other. 2 weeks after Zelda arrived, Ryland came back from town with supplies and news. "Heard in town that there is going to be a dance at the church next Saturday," he said as he unloaded sacks of flour and sugar. "The whole community comes. There will be music and food and such." "That sounds nice," Zelda said, though her tone was uncertain. "I was thinking maybe you would like to go," Ryland said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You have been working hard, and it might be good for you to meet some of the other women in town, make some friends." What he did not say was that he wanted to take her, wanted to be seen with her, wanted to dance with her. But that felt too forward, too soon. "I would like that," Zelda said, "though I am not sure my dress is fine enough for a dance." Ryland looked at her calico dress, which though clean and well mended was clearly worn. "Sarah had some dresses," he said slowly, "in the trunk in the bedroom. I have not been able to bring myself to go through them, but you are welcome to look, see if there is anything that might fit you." She would have wanted them to be worn, not sitting in a trunk gathering moths. Zelda bit her lip, clearly torn. "Are you sure? That seems very personal." "I am sure," Ryland said, and he was. It felt right somehow, like Sarah was giving her blessing. That evening, Zelda carefully went through the trunk while Ryland sat in the main room, pretending to read a newspaper that was 3 weeks old. He could hear the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of Zelda moving things around. Finally, she emerged wearing a dress of deep green cotton with tiny flowers embroidered at the collar and cuffs. It fit her well, perhaps a touch loose in places, but nothing that could not be remedied with a few stitches. "It is beautiful," Zelda said softly, running her hands down the skirt. "She had wonderful taste." "She made that one herself," Ryland said, his throat tight. "Worked on it all winter the first year we were married. Said she wanted something pretty for church socials." He paused, looking at Zelda in Sarah's dress, and felt that confused mix of emotions again, grief and something else, something that felt like the first warm day after a long winter. "It looks good on you. You should keep it." "I could not," Zelda protested. "Yes, you can," Ryland insisted. "Please, I want you to have it." Zelda's eyes shimmered with tears. "Thank you, Ryland. I will take good care of it." The night of the dance arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze that smelled of sage and wildflowers. Ryland hitched up his wagon, brushed down his good jacket, and helped Zelda climb up onto the seat. She had done something different with her hair, pulling it back but leaving some curls to frame her face, and in Sarah's green dress with the late sun catching in her dark hair, she looked lovely. The church was in town, a simple white building with a steeple that could be seen from a mile away. By the time they arrived, there were already a dozen wagons there and people were milling about, talking and laughing. Inside, someone was tuning a fiddle, and the sound drifted out into the evening air. As soon as they walked in, Martha from the general store swooped down on them like a friendly hawk. She was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an insatiable curiosity about everyone's business. Ryland Foster, as I live and breathe, she said. I have not seen you at a dance in I do not know how long. And Miss Jordan, how are you settling in out at the ranch? Very well, thank you, Zelda said politely. She has mended every stitch of clothing I own, Ryland said. And half the other things in the house besides. Well, that is wonderful, Martha said. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. There are a few biddies here who will talk, seeing you two arrive together, but you pay them no mind. Folks need to mind their own business, if you ask me. Ryland felt his jaw tighten. He had not thought about how it might look, bringing Zelda to the dance. But Martha patted his arm reassuringly. Like I said, pay them no mind. You deserve happiness same as anyone, and Sarah was my dear friend, but she would not want you sitting out there alone and miserable. Now go on, introduce Zelda around proper. The evening was a success, despite Ryland's initial worry. Most people were friendly and welcoming to Zelda, and if a few of the older women sniffed disapprovingly, they kept their opinions mostly to themselves. The music was lively, provided by old Sam Crawford on fiddle, his son on guitar, and a young woman named Alice playing a worn piano that had been hauled into the church for the occasion. Ryland danced with Zelda 3 times, which he knew was probably 2 times too many for propriety's sake, but he found he did not care. She was light on her feet despite claiming she had not danced in years, and when she laughed at something he said, her whole face lit up in a way that made his heart do strange things in his chest. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for some air. The moon was rising, nearly full, painting everything in silver light. They walked a little way from the church where it was quieter and stood looking up at the stars. Thank you for bringing me tonight, Zelda said. I have not felt this normal in a long time. What do you mean, normal? Ryland asked. Like a person, not just someone grieving or struggling or trying to survive, she said. Tonight I got to just be Zelda, dancing and talking and eating cake. It felt good. I know what you mean, Ryland said. I have felt more alive these past few weeks than I have since Sarah died. And I feel guilty about that, like I am betraying her memory by not being sad all the time. Zelda turned to look at him, her face serious in the moonlight. Can I tell you something my mother told me before she died? Of course. She said that the dead do not want our sadness. They want us to live, to be happy, to remember them with love but not to stop moving forward because they cannot. She said grief is natural and right, but it should not be a prison. Ryland felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had not realized he had been carrying. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, Zelda said softly. I wish you could have met her. I wish you could have met James too. I think you would have liked him and he would have liked you. I wish I could have met them both, Ryland said, and I wish Sarah could have met you. She would have liked you too. You remind me of her in some ways. Not that you are the same, but there is something in your strength, your determination to keep going no matter what. They stood there for a moment, comfortable in the silence, before the music started up again inside and they returned to the dance. The ride home was quiet but not awkward. Zelda dozed against Ryland's shoulder as the wagon rattled over the road, and he found himself very aware of the warmth of her, the faint scent of the lavender soap she used. When they arrived back at the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon, and their hands lingered together just a moment longer than necessary. Good night, Ryland, Zelda said. Good night, Zelda. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long days and the hard work of haying season. Ryland hired 2 temporary hands to help with the cutting and stacking, young men from town who needed the work. Zelda insisted on helping, raking hay and bringing water out to the fields, despite Ryland's protests that it was too hard for her. I am stronger than I look, she said with a determination that reminded him of Sarah, though he had learned not to make the comparison aloud. "And you are paying me for my work. I will earn my keep properly." The truth was, she earned her keep a dozen times over. Beyond the mending, which was long since finished, she had taken over much of the household work, cooking meals that were far better than anything Ryland had managed on his own, tending a garden she had planted behind the house, even helping with the livestock when needed. She had a way with the chickens that was almost magical, and egg production had doubled since she arrived. But more than the practical help, her presence had brought life back to the ranch. The house felt like a home again, with curtains that smelled of fresh air and sunshine, flowers on the table, the sound of humming while she worked. Tucker adored her and followed her everywhere when he was not working with Ryland. Even the horses seemed calmer around her. One evening in late June, after a particularly long day of haying, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the plateau. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink and purple, the colors so vivid they barely seemed real. "I have been thinking," Zelda said carefully, "about what happens when all the mending is done and the summer work is finished." Ryland felt his stomach tighten. He had been avoiding thinking about that, about the possibility of Zelda leaving. What about it? "I do not want to leave," Zelda said, looking down at her hands. "I am happy here, happier than I have been in a long time, but I do not want to impose on your kindness if I am no longer needed." "You are needed," Ryland said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "There is always work to be done on a ranch, and I could not manage half as well without your help." He paused, gathering his courage. "And it is not just about the work. I like having you here, Zelda. I like talking to you and eating meals with you and knowing someone is waiting when I come back from the fields. These past months, you have become important to me." Zelda looked up, and in the fading light, he could see hope and fear warring in her expression. "You have become important to me too," she said softly. "But I do not know if it is too soon. We have both lost people we loved. Is it wrong to feel something new when the old grief is still there?" "I do not think it is wrong," Ryland said. "I think maybe it is just being human. The grief does not go away, I am learning that, but it makes room for other things too if we let it." He reached across and took her hand, and she did not pull away. They sat like that as the stars came out, holding hands and not speaking, until the night grew cool and they went inside. The relationship between them shifted after that night, becoming something acknowledged if not yet fully defined. Ryland found excuses to touch her hand, to stand close to her. Zelda would smile at him in ways that made his heart race. They were careful, proper, always conscious that this was still a small community and people talked. But in the privacy of the ranch, in the evenings after the work was done, they allowed themselves to grow closer. One Sunday in July, they went on a picnic up into the foothills. Zelda had packed a basket with fried chicken, biscuits, cheese, and a pie made with the first cherries from the tree beside the house. They rode out on horseback, Zelda on the gentle mare that had been Sarah's horse, which had not been ridden much in the past months. They found a spot near a creek, where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water sang over rocks. They ate and talked and laughed, and for a few hours, the weight of their respective griefs seemed lighter. "Can I ask you something?" Zelda said, lying back on the blanket and looking up through the leaves at the blue sky above. "Anything," Ryland said. "What do you dream about? For the future, I mean." Ryland thought about it, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I want the ranch to prosper," he said. "I want to build the herd, maybe add some sheep, though cattle ranchers are not supposed to say such things. I want to improve the house, add on a real parlor and maybe another bedroom or two. I want to build something lasting, something that will be here long after I am gone." He paused. "I used to dream about doing all that with Sarah, and about the children we would have. Now I do not know what to dream anymore." "I think you should keep dreaming those dreams," Zelda said. "Maybe the details change, but the heart of it is still good. There is nothing wrong with wanting to build a life." "What about you?" Ryland asked. "What do you dream about?" "I dream about belonging somewhere," Zelda said. "About having a place that is mine, people who are mine. I dream about waking up in the morning and knowing exactly where I am supposed to be and what I am supposed to do. I have felt like I have been drifting since James died, blown from place to place like a leaf in the wind. I want to put down roots." Ryland rolled onto his side to look at her. "What if you could put down roots here?" Zelda turned her head to meet his eyes. "Is that what you are asking me, Ryland Foster?" "Maybe," he said. "If it is not too soon, if I am not being too forward. I know we have only known each other a few months, but it feels like longer. It feels right, having you here. I do not want you to go, and not just because of the work you do. I want you to stay because I am falling in love with you, Zelda, and I think maybe you might be falling in love with me too." Zelda's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I am falling in love with you," she said. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is too soon, that I should wait, that people will talk. But I cannot help it. You are a good man, Ryland, and you make me feel safe and happy and like I have a future worth dreaming about again." Ryland leaned down and kissed her, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper when she kissed him back. It was sweet and a little awkward and perfect, there by the creek with the water singing and the wind in the cottonwoods. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "So you will stay?" Ryland asked. "Yes," Zelda said, "I will stay." "As my wife," Ryland pressed, wanting to be clear, wanting no misunderstanding. "As your wife," Zelda agreed. "If you will have me." "I will have you," Ryland said, and kissed her again. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they had danced, with Martha and her husband standing as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Zelda wore Sarah's wedding dress, which she had found in the trunk, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. Ryland had worried that it might bother him, seeing Zelda in Sarah's dress, but it did not. Instead, it felt like a blessing, like Sarah was there in spirit, approving of this new beginning. The preacher was a circuit rider named Reverend Thomas, a stern-faced man who nevertheless had kind eyes. He spoke about love and loss, about how grief and joy could exist together, about building a future while honoring the past. His words seemed aimed directly at Ryland and Zelda, and more than a few people in the congregation wiped their eyes. When Ryland kissed his new bride, there was applause and cheering, and then everyone adjourned to the churchyard for food and celebration. Martha had organized the women to bring dishes, and there was enough food to feed twice the number of people present. There was music too, Sam Crawford and his son playing lively tunes on fiddle and guitar. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Ryland and Zelda found themselves standing a little apart from the crowd, holding hands and watching the festivities. "Are you happy?" Ryland asked. "Happier than I thought I could be again," Zelda said. "Are you?" "Yes," Ryland said simply. "I am happy." They left before sunset, eager to begin their new life together. The ranch had never looked better, Ryland thought as they drove up. The summer rains had been good, and everything was green and growing. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney where he had laid a fire that morning. He helped Zelda down from the wagon and then, on impulse, scooped her up in his arms to carry her across the threshold. She laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck, and Tucker danced around them, barking with excitement. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," Ryland said as he set her down inside. "It is good to be home, Mr. Foster," Zelda replied, and it was true. This was home now, for both of them, a place where two broken hearts could heal together. That first night as husband and wife was tender and careful, both of them navigating the newness of physical intimacy while carrying the memories of previous marriages. But there was also joy and discovery, and a sense of rightness that transcended the awkwardness. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Zelda's head on his shoulder, Ryland felt at peace for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I love you too," Zelda replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The months that followed were busy and full. The ranch demanded constant attention as summer turned to fall, and there was the harvest to bring in, cattle to round up and sort, preparations to make for winter. But now Ryland was not facing it alone. Zelda worked beside him, learning the rhythms of ranch life, becoming more confident on horseback, developing a rapport with the cattle that surprised them both. In October, they took a wagon to town and purchased supplies for winter: flour and sugar and coffee, fabric for Zelda to make new curtains and shirts, boots for Ryland whose old ones had finally given out. They also bought something else, a cradle that Ryland had spotted in the corner of the general store. "Are we getting ahead of ourselves?" Zelda had asked, blushing. "Maybe," Ryland admitted, "but I am an optimistic man and I figure we might as well be prepared." Martha, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed delight, insisted on throwing in a beautiful quilt she had made. "For when the time comes," she said with a knowing wink. That time came sooner than they expected. In November, Zelda began feeling ill in the mornings, and by December, there was no doubt. She was with child, due to arrive sometime in late June or early July. Ryland was thrilled and terrified in equal measure. He had lost Sarah and their baby, and the fear of losing Zelda the same way haunted his dreams. But Zelda was practical about it, as she was about most things. "Women have babies every day," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I am healthy and strong, and we will get the doctor from town when the time comes. Everything will be fine." "You do not know that," Ryland said, unable to keep the fear from his voice. "No, I do not," Zelda admitted, "but I choose to believe it anyway, and I need you to believe it too, Ryland. I need you to be hopeful with me, not afraid." He pulled her close, holding her tight. "I will try," he promised. "For you, I will try." Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late November and continuing on and off through December. Ryland made sure the house was tight and warm, banking the foundation with straw, checking the chimney, laying in extra firewood. They settled into a cozy domesticity. The long winter evenings spent by the fire with Zelda sewing baby clothes and Ryland reading aloud from the newspapers he brought back from town. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them and Tucker, but it was joyful nonetheless. Ryland had carved a rocking horse for the baby, spending weeks on it in the barn when Zelda was not looking. She had made him a new shirt, deep blue wool that brought out his eyes, with his initials embroidered on the pocket. "I thought about making baby things," she said as he unwrapped it, "but I wanted you to have something too, something to remind you that you are loved." Ryland kissed her thoroughly, the shirt forgotten for the moment. "I do not need a reminder," he said, "but I love it anyway, thank you." As Zelda's pregnancy progressed through the winter and into spring, Ryland became increasingly protective. He would barely let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, worried constantly about her health. Zelda bore his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love and fear. In March, there was a scare when Zelda had some pain and bleeding. Ryland rode through a snowstorm to fetch the doctor, a capable man named Dr. Harrison who had settled in Montrose the previous year. Dr. Harrison examined Zelda and pronounced that while she needed to take it easy for a few weeks, Both she and the baby were fine. Bleeding can happen sometimes, he told them. It does not always mean something is wrong, but she needs rest and no heavy work for at least a month. Can you manage that? I will manage it, Ryland said firmly, and he did. He took over all the household chores, cooking meals that were edible if not particularly good, doing the laundry, even attempting to sweep and dust, though he was not very good at it. Zelda directed him from her bed, trying not to laugh at his fumbling attempts at domestic work. I have new respect for what you do every day, Ryland said after burning yet another batch of biscuits. This is harder than ranching. It is just different, Zelda said diplomatically. And I appreciate you trying, even the burned biscuits. By April, the danger had passed, and Zelda was back on her feet, though Ryland still watched her like a hawk. The snow melted, revealing the first green shoots of spring, and the world came alive again. Calves were born in the fields, and Ryland worked from dawn to dusk, checking on the herd, mending fences, preparing the fields for planting. In May, they hired a woman from town, a widow named Clara who agreed to come stay at the ranch as Zelda's due date approached. Clara had raised 6 children of her own and had experience with birthing babies. Her presence eased some of Ryland's anxiety, though he still worried. You are going to wear a path in the floor with your pacing, Zelda told him one evening in late June. She was huge now, her belly seeming impossibly large, and she was uncomfortable and tired, though she tried not to complain. I cannot help it, Ryland said. Any day now and then. And then we will have a baby, Zelda finished for him. A beautiful, healthy baby that we will love and raise together. That is what is going to happen, Ryland. Hold on to that thought. The baby came on a hot July night, 3 days after Zelda's prediction. Her labor started in the evening, slow contractions that grew stronger as the night wore on. Ryland sent for Dr. Harrison, and then was relegated to waiting outside with Tucker while Clara and the doctor worked. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Ryland paced and prayed and tried not to think about Sarah, tried not to remember the terrible night when she had labored for hours and hours, and then the awful silence when it was over. Instead, he forced himself to think about Zelda's words, about hope and faith and believing in good outcomes. Dawn was breaking when he finally heard it, the strong, lusty cry of a newborn baby. His knees went weak with relief, and he had to lean against the porch railing for support. A few minutes later, Clara appeared at the door, beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs. And Zelda is doing well, tired but well. You can come see them now." Ryland entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Zelda was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a bundle wrapped in the quilt Martha had given them. "Doctor." Harrison was packing up his bag, looking satisfied. "Meet your son," Zelda said as Ryland approached the bed. He looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut. The baby was making soft, grunting noises, his little fists waving in the air. Ryland felt his eyes fill with tears. "He is perfect," Ryland whispered. "He is," Zelda agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Ryland thought about the people who had brought him to this moment. "What about Robert after my father?" he suggested. "And maybe James for the middle name after your late husband." Zelda's eyes welled up. "Robert James Foster," she said. "It is perfect. I think they both would have been honored." "Can I hold him?" Ryland asked. Zelda carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and Ryland looked down at his son with wonder. Robert opened his eyes for a moment, unfocused and dark blue, and Ryland felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Hello, Robert," he said softly. I am your papa, and I promise I am going to do my best by you. I am going to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are so wanted, so loved already." The baby yawned, a tiny, perfect gesture, and Ryland laughed through his tears. The weeks after Robert's birth were exhausting but joyful. The baby was a good sleeper, for which they were both grateful, but he still needed to be fed every few hours, and Zelda was worn out from the demands of nursing and recovering from childbirth. Ryland did everything he could to help, changing diapers, walking the floor with Robert when he was fussy, bringing Zelda meals in bed. Clara stayed for 2 weeks, helping with the housework and cooking, teaching Ryland how to swaddle the baby properly and support his head. By the time she left, they had found their rhythm as parents, stumbling and uncertain but managing. Martha and several other women from town came to visit, bringing food and gifts and advice. The house was full of noise and laughter, and Ryland realized that somewhere along the way, without really noticing, they had built a community around them, people who cared and wanted to help. As summer progressed into fall, Robert grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, and he had Zelda's dark hair and Ryland's blue eyes. Watching Zelda with their son, Ryland was struck over and over by how lucky he was, how easily things could have gone differently. One evening in September, after putting Robert to bed in the cradle beside their bed, they sat on the porch watching the sun set, just as they had done so many times before. "You ever think about them?" Zelda asked quietly. "Sarah and James." "Sometimes," Ryland admitted. "Less than I used to, which makes me feel guilty sometimes. But I think they would understand. I think they would want us to be happy." "I think so too," Zelda said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love James, and I know you loved Sarah. Those were real loves, and they do not go away just because new love comes along. But I love you, Ryland, and I love our life together and our son. I am grateful every day that I found you or that you found me." "We found each other," Ryland corrected, "and I am grateful too. That day you showed up at my door, asking about mending work. I had no idea you were going to change my whole life." "I came to mend your clothes," Zelda said with a soft laugh. "I did not expect to mend your heart instead." "You did more than mend it," Ryland said, pulling her close. "You made it whole again. You gave me a reason to dream about the future instead of just surviving day to day. You gave me love and a family and a home that feels alive again." They sat there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Inside, Robert made a small sound in his sleep, and they both smiled. "Should we go in?" Zelda asked. "In a minute," Ryland said. "I just want to sit here with you a little longer, taking it all in. The ranch, the mountains, the stars coming out, and knowing you and Robert are here with me. This is everything I ever wanted, Zelda. Everything I dreamed about when I first came west. I just did not know it yet." "Well, you have it now," Zelda said. "And I have it too. A home, a husband I love, a beautiful son, and a future that looks bright." "To the future," Ryland said, kissing the top of her head. "To the future," Zelda agreed. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick, fences that needed constant repair, the never-ending work of keeping a ranch running. But Ryland and Zelda faced it all together, their love deepening with each passing season. Robert grew into a bright, active boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. He followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk, helping with chores as soon as he was old enough, developing a way with animals that reminded Ryland of Zelda. When Robert was 3, Zelda became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1881 they welcomed a daughter they named Rose. She had Ryland's blonde hair and Zelda's dark eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. 2 years after that came another son, William, who was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and watch the world rather than rushing headlong into it like his older brother. The house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Ryland added on the parlor and extra bedrooms he had dreamed about. The ranch prospered too. The herd grew, and they added sheep as Ryland had once mentioned wanting to do, which proved profitable despite the teasing from other cattle ranchers. Through it all, Ryland and Zelda remained devoted to each other. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when they could, watching the sun set and talking about their day. They still held hands across the table at supper. They still found moments, stolen here and there between the demands of children and ranch work, to be alone together, to remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryland gave Zelda a locket with a picture of all 3 children inside. "I know it is not much," he said, suddenly shy. "It is perfect," Zelda said, tears in her eyes. She opened it and looked at the faces of Robert, Rose, and William. "Absolutely perfect. Thank you, my love." "Thank you," Ryland said, "for saying yes when I asked you to stay. For taking a chance on a broken-hearted rancher who did not know the first thing about mending his own clothes." Zelda laughed. "You still do not know the first thing about mending clothes," she teased. "But that is all right. I do not mind doing it." "I love you, Zelda Foster," Ryland said. "I love you too, Ryland Foster," Zelda replied. They kissed, and in the background they could hear the children playing, Robert teaching Rose how to rope a fence post while William watched. Tucker, now an old dog who slept more than he worked, was lying in the sun nearby. "We have built a good life," Zelda said, looking out at the ranch, at the mountains in the distance, at the children playing. "We have," Ryland agreed. "And we are not done yet. There is still so much ahead of us, so much to do and see and experience together." "I am looking forward to all of it," Zelda said. "Every single moment." As the years continued to pass, the Foster Ranch became known throughout the Montrose area as one of the best-run operations. Ryland's reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread, and buyers would come from as far as Denver to purchase his cattle and sheep. But more than that, the ranch became known as a place of warmth and hospitality, where a traveler could always find a meal and a place to sleep, where neighbors in trouble could find help, where the door was always open. Much of that was due to Zelda, who seemed to have an inexhaustible capacity for caring. She sewed clothes for families who could not afford new ones, brought food to the sick, helped organize church socials and school events. The small room off the kitchen where she had first stayed became her sewing room, filled with fabric and thread and half-finished projects. Robert grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind and kind heart. He went to the newly opened school in Montrose and excelled, showing an aptitude for mathematics and reading that surprised everyone. By the time he was 15, he was essentially running the ranch alongside Ryland, and they were talking about buying more land to expand the operation. Rose was a beauty. With long blonde hair she wore in braids and a smile that could charm anyone. But she was also tough as nails, able to outride and outrope most of the boys her age, and she had no patience for anyone who suggested girls should not do ranch work. She idolized her older brother and followed him everywhere, much to Robert's alternating annoyance and pride. William, true to his early temperament, was the quiet one. He loved books and learning, and while he did his share of ranch work without complaint, his heart was not in it the way Robert's was. Ryland worried about this at first, wondering if William felt like he did not fit in, but Zelda reassured him. Not everyone is meant to be a rancher, she said. And that is all right. William has his own path to find, and we should support him in that, whatever it turns out to be. She was right, as she usually was. When William was 14, the new schoolteacher in Montrose, a young man fresh from back east, recognized William's potential and began tutoring him in advanced subjects. It became clear that William was brilliant and that his future likely lay in further education, perhaps even university. "I feel like I am letting you down," William said to Ryland one evening, his young face troubled. "Robert loves the ranch, but I—" "You are not letting anyone down," Ryland said firmly. "You are being true to yourself, and that is all any father could ask. Your mother and I are proud of you, William, so proud. If you want to go to university and study, then that is what you should do. The ranch will always be here if you want to come back, but you should not feel obligated." The relief on William's face was evident. "Thank you, Papa. I do love the ranch, and I love you and Mama and everyone here. I just feel like there is something else I am supposed to do." "Then go do it," Ryland said, "with our blessing and our love." In the spring of 1890, when Robert was 18 and preparing to take over more responsibility for the ranch, Zelda became pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. She was 40 years old, and it had been 7 years since William was born. Dr. Harrison, now gray-haired but still the town's physician, cautioned that it could be a difficult pregnancy given her age, but Zelda was determined and optimistic, as she had been with all her pregnancies. "Women have babies at 40, she told a worried Ryland. "It is not that unusual. And besides, maybe God decided we needed one more." The pregnancy was indeed harder than the previous ones. Zelda was tired and uncomfortable, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. But she persevered, and in December of that year she gave birth to another daughter, a tiny, perfect little girl they named Sarah. "Are you sure?" Ryland had asked when Zelda suggested the name. "I do not want you to feel like you have to." "I want to," Zelda insisted. "Your first wife gave you so much, and she deserves to be remembered and honored. What better way than to give her name to our daughter? Besides, I think she would approve, do not you?" Ryland thought about it and realized she was right. Sarah would have loved this, loved that her name would live on, loved that Ryland had found happiness again. "Yes," he said, "I think she would approve very much." Baby Sarah was adored by her older siblings. Robert was fiercely protective of his tiny sister. Rose appointed herself as a second mother. And even William, usually lost in his books, would put everything aside to hold the baby and make her smile. Tucker had passed away 2 years earlier, and they now had a young dog named Scout, who seemed to understand that this small human was precious and needed watching over. As little Sarah grew from baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Robert married at 20, a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch named Elizabeth, and they built a house on the far end of the property. A year later, they had a son, making Ryland and Zelda grandparents for the first time. "Grandpa Ryland," Zelda teased when she heard Robert's son calling him that. "How does it feel?" "Strange," Ryland admitted, "but good, really good." He looked at his grandson, a chubby baby with Robert's features. "I never thought I would live to see this day, you know. After Sarah died, I thought my chance at a family was over, and now look at us. 3 grown children, 1 growing up and a grandchild. It is more than I ever dreamed." "We have been blessed," Zelda agreed. She was 50 now, with threads of silver in her dark hair, but to Ryland she was as beautiful as the day she had shown up at his door asking about mending work. "More blessed than I ever thought possible." Rose, at 18, shocked everyone by announcing she had no intention of marrying anytime soon. "I want to see something of the world first," she declared. "Maybe go to Denver, maybe even further. There is more to life than Montrose, and I want to experience it." It was hard to let her go, but Ryland and Zelda understood. They had both left their homes and traveled west seeking something more after all. They could not deny their daughter the same opportunity. So in the summer of 1893, Rose left for Denver with their blessing and enough money to get started, planning to work in a dress shop owned by a friend of Martha's. William, meanwhile, had indeed gone to university, studying mathematics and physics at a school in California. He wrote long letters home, full of enthusiasm for his studies and descriptions of the strange, wonderful world of academia. Ryland did not understand half of what William wrote about, but he saved every letter, proud beyond measure of his scholarly son. That left just young Sarah at home, and she became the center of their attention. At 6 years old, she was bright and curious, full of questions about everything. She loved helping her mother in the garden and her father with the animals, and she was learning to read with an enthusiasm that reminded Ryland of William at that age. One evening, after putting Sarah to bed, Ryland and Zelda sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The house was quiet, so different from the chaos of when all the children were young. In the distance, they could see lights from Robert and Elizabeth's house, where their grandson was probably being put to bed. "You ever miss it?" Ryland asked. "The noise and chaos of when they were all little?" "Sometimes," Zelda admitted, "but I also appreciate the peace. We have earned it, I think, after raising 4 children on a ranch in the middle of nowhere." "It is not nowhere," Ryland protested with mock indignation. "It is the finest piece of land in all of Colorado." Zelda laughed. "Of course it is, my love. I would not want to be anywhere else." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the wind in the trees, an owl hooting somewhere in the distance, the cattle settling down in the fields. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Zelda asked quietly. "If I had not come to Montrose that day, if Martha had not told me about you needing someone to mend clothes all the time," Ryland said. "And every time I do, I am grateful it worked out the way it did. You changed my life, Zelda. You took a broken, grieving man and showed him how to live again, how to love again. Everything good in my life now comes from that day you knocked on my door." "I think we saved each other," Zelda said. "I was just as broken as you were, just as lost. We found each other at exactly the right moment when we both needed someone to hold on to." "To finding each other," Ryland said, raising an imaginary glass. "To finding each other," Zelda echoed, and they kissed under the stars. The years continued their steady march forward. The new century arrived, bringing changes to Montrose and the surrounding area. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle and receive goods. Automobiles started appearing in town, strange, noisy contraptions that spooked the horses. Electricity came to Montrose, though the ranch was too far out to connect to it. Through it all, Ryland and Zelda remained constants in each other's lives. They weathered hard times and celebrated good times together. When drought struck in 1902, threatening the ranch, they worked together to keep the operation going, hauling water and making difficult decisions about which cattle to sell. When beef prices boomed a few years later, they celebrated by taking a trip to Denver to visit Rose, who had married a newspaper editor and was living a life very different from the one she had grown up in. William became a professor at the same university where he had studied, teaching mathematics and publishing papers that Ryland could not begin to understand, but was immensely proud of nonetheless. He married a fellow academic, a woman who studied astronomy, and they had 2 daughters who showed signs of inheriting their parents' brilliant minds. Robert and Elizabeth had 3 more children after their first son, and the ranch became a multi-generational operation, with Robert taking over more and more of the day-to-day management as Ryland slowed down. But Ryland never fully retired. Even in his 60s, he still rode out to check the herds, still mended fences, still loved the work that had defined so much of his life. Young Sarah grew into a remarkable young woman, combining her mother's practicality with her father's determination. At 20, she surprised no one by announcing she wanted to be a doctor, inspired by Dr. Harrison, who had delivered her and tended to the family for decades. It was still unusual for women to become doctors, but Sarah was undeterred, and with her parents' support, she applied to medical school. In 1907, on their 30th wedding anniversary, Ryland and Zelda renewed their vows in the same church where they had been married. All 4 of their children came home for the occasion, along with their families, and the little church was packed with friends, neighbors, and the extended Foster clan. Reverend Thomas had long since passed, and the ceremony was performed by a young minister who had only recently arrived in Montrose. But he spoke beautifully about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, about the example that Ryland and Zelda had set for everyone who knew them. When it came time for Ryland to speak his vows again, he looked at Zelda, now 57, with silver hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling, and he felt the same surge of love he had felt that day by the creek when he first kissed her. "I, Ryland Foster, take you, Zelda Jordan Foster, to be my wife again and always," he said, his voice strong despite his 62 years. "30 years ago you came to my door looking for work mending clothes, and instead you mended my broken heart. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to dream again. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend through everything. You have given me 4 incredible children, a home full of love and laughter, and more happiness than any man has a right to expect. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." There was not a dry eye in the church when he finished. Zelda was crying openly as she spoke her own vows, reaffirming her love and commitment to the man who had given her a home when she needed one most. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and music and dancing that went on until well after dark. Ryland danced with his wife, with his daughters, with his granddaughters, and with nearly every woman in attendance. His feet hurt and he was exhausted, but he would not have changed a single moment of it. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, the family gathered in the ranch house, the house that had grown and changed over the years, just as the family had. Robert's oldest son, now 25, was telling a story about his first roundup, making everyone laugh with his vivid descriptions. Ryland looked around the room at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. His children, grown and successful in their own ways. His grandchildren, ranging from infants to young adults, the next generation of Fosters. And at the center of it all, Zelda, laughing at her grandson's story, her hand resting on Ryland's knee. This, he thought, was what it was all about. Not the land, not the cattle, not the work, though all of those things mattered. It was about family, about love, about building something that would last beyond your own life. "What are you thinking about?" Zelda whispered, leaning close. "Just how lucky I am," Ryland whispered back. "How incredibly lucky." "We both are," Zelda said, squeezing his hand. The years after their 30th anniversary were peaceful and content. Ryland finally truly retired from ranch work, leaving the operation in Robert's capable hands. He and Zelda spent their days tending the garden, reading, taking walks around the property they had built together, and doting on their growing collection of grandchildren. Sarah became Dr. Sarah Foster, one of the first female doctors in Colorado, and opened a practice in Montrose. She remained unmarried, devoted to her work, but she was happy and fulfilled, which was all her parents wanted for her. Rose and her husband moved back to Colorado after her husband bought a newspaper in Grand Junction. They visited often, and Rose always made a point of riding out to check on the old ranch, reclaiming some of the cowgirl she had been in her youth. William continued his academic career, becoming increasingly renowned in his field. He wrote a book that was published to great acclaim, and though Ryland could not understand most of it, he kept a copy prominently displayed and told anyone who would listen that his son had written it. In the spring of 1912, Ryland fell ill with pneumonia. At 67, he was strong for his age, but the illness hit him hard. For weeks, he lay in bed, struggling to breathe, drifting in and out of consciousness. Zelda barely left his side, and the children came home one by one to say their goodbyes, fearing the worst. But Ryland was stubborn, and with Zelda's constant care and Sarah's medical expertise, he pulled through. The recovery was slow, and he was never quite as strong as he had been before, but he survived. "You scared me," Zelda said one evening as they sat on the porch, Ryland wrapped in blankets despite the warm weather, still regaining his strength. "I scared myself," Ryland admitted. "When I was at my worst, I kept thinking about Sarah, about how I was going to see her again, and I was ready for that. But then I would think about you, about leaving you, and I could not do it. I could not leave you alone." "I would have been all right," Zelda said, though her voice trembled. "We have children and grandchildren. I would have been taken care of. But I am so glad you stayed. I am not ready to say goodbye to you yet, Ryland Foster. I need more time with you." "You will have it," Ryland promised. "As much as I can give you," and he did. They had 7 more good years together. Years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren being born. Years of quiet contentment and deep love. They celebrated their 40th anniversary with a small gathering, just family, and it was perfect. In the winter of 1919, Ryland died peacefully in his sleep, Zelda beside him as she had been for 42 years. He was 74 years old. The funeral was held in the church where they had married and renewed their vows, and it seemed like the entire county turned out to pay their respects to the man who had been a pillar of the community for half a century. Zelda grieved deeply, but with dignity. She had known this day would come eventually, and while the pain of losing him was sharp and real, she also felt grateful for the years they had shared, for the life they had built together. She lived for another 8 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tending her garden, and sitting on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set over the mountains, remembering the man she had loved for more than 4 decades. When she died in her sleep in 1927, at the age of 77, her children found a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she talked about her life, about the losses she had endured and the joys she had experienced. But mostly, she talked about Ryland, about how he had saved her just as much as she had saved him, about how their love had been the defining force of her life. "I came to mend his clothes," she wrote in her careful script, "but instead we mended each other's broken hearts and built a life more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. If I have any wisdom to pass on, it is this: love is always worth the risk. Grief is the price we pay for love, but that price is worth paying 1,000 times over for the joy that comes before. Do not be afraid to love, even when you have been hurt. Do not be afraid to hope, even when hope seems foolish. Life is too short to live in fear. Live boldly, love deeply, and build something beautiful with the time you are given." She was buried beside Ryland in the church cemetery, under the shade of a cottonwood tree, their graves marked with simple headstones. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Robert's line, and it stands to this day, a testament to the love and hard work of a rancher and a seamstress who found each other when they both needed it most. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Uncompahgre Plateau and the wind whispers through the grass, some say you can still feel their presence there. Two souls who loved deeply and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love, family, and the unshakable belief that broken hearts can heal, and that second chances are real if you are brave enough to take them.